The opposition says it will pilot a child sex offender disclosure scheme if it wins government. The scheme would allow members of the public to request information about whether someone is a convicted child sex offender. Maggie Hall is a criminal lawyer and social worker, and she joins us now. Hi there, Maggie. So the opposition has said today that it's based this policy on a scheme that's already underway in WA. Can you take us through what the current legislation in Western Australia is in relation to sharing details of a convicted child sex offender?
Yes, it's quite a strict scheme in the sense that the person requesting the information needs to live in the area in which the suspected child sex offender also resides, and they need to give their personal information in order to obtain that information. My understanding is that they're then not allowed to share that information with anybody else. So there may well be offences attached to disclosure of information like that. So it is quite a strict scheme in that sense. Like all of these schemes, there's very little evidence as to how they operate. The Australian Institute of Criminology did a bit of a round in 2019, and they found that even the ones that the public couldn't access, registration schemes, there wasn't a lot of evidence to back them up. And so we just don't know what the situation is with that Western Australian model. What we do have, though, is evidence from the US, where there are many publicly available sex offender registration schemes. And the evidence we have there is that it doesn't prevent crime. It often adds to vigilantism. It gives people a sense of false security because the majority of child sex offences, in fact, occur perpetrated by people that the child knows. And so it doesn't really help in any meaningful way. And it doesn't even help people's fear of crime. I kind of thought for a while, well, okay, if it makes people feel better, but it doesn't. And so these are the ones where people can't find out. And so the consequences of having them publicly available, I think we really need to look carefully at those and see whether we're not setting ourselves up for more difficulties than we're actually solving, because there is no evidence they actually prevent crime.
Listening to this announcement this morning, there was discussion around it sort of being a case where a parent could seek information from police about someone who works with their child or is with their child in sort of an unsupervised situation. But is it possible in any jurisdiction in Australia for anyone to get a working with children's check at all if they do have a conviction for a child sex offence? Would they be in a position to be able to be unsupervised with a child in the first place?
No, they wouldn't. We've got pretty good legislation around working with children checks. If you even charged with a criminal offence, any criminal offence, you'd find it really difficult to get a working with children check. So theoretically, those schemes are actually very good. Of course, there are incidents and there are people who get around those, particularly people who don't have previous convictions. And we have to remember that counter to everybody's intuition about child sex offences, they don't have very high rates of recidivism. They generally don't reoffend very often, unlike other offences. And I know people find that hard to believe, but that is in fact the case. So that is also an example. So it is already very difficult for children, for people who've had convictions and even charges in this area to work with children. And I don't think we may need to look at some of those, tightening up some of those schemes, but they certainly already exist.
You mentioned earlier around parents or people requesting this information not being allowed to share it. But realistically, if your child is in a situation where they're in contact with someone who you find out is convicted of child sex offences, and then you're not allowed to share that with your neighbour, how realistic is it that people do keep that information to themselves, and what are the legal ramifications for them there if they do share that information?
And that's right. I mean, there is potential. I don't know if there have been any legal ramifications from that, but there's certainly a potential for that. if the legislation precludes that, then certainly you would expect there to be some consequences for sharing that. And of course, because it's geographically set, you can only do it if you're in the same area. If your friend lives over the other side of the road, which is not in that area, and you know their child may come in contact or is near that, then you are going to want to share that information. It's only natural that you would want to do so. So I think that even the protections that it has got are quite illusory, really. And of course, that knowledge will be shared, and it could certainly lead to some of the negative effects that we've seen in the US with publicly available schemes where we've got vigilante behaviour and innocent people getting killed. Even the wife of a sex offender was killed when neighbours torched the house. At some point. So you've really got to be careful about the negative consequences. Innocent people can be killed, and we don't encourage vigilante justice. And if police know about these things, then we should be confident that people who might pose a risk to the community are being monitored. And if we don't have faith in that, then we need to be looking at tightening up those procedures rather than encouraging people to know themselves. It doesn't help. It doesn't even help the way they feel. It doesn't even help their fear of crime. And so there doesn't seem to be any really good reasons in the evidence to do it.